Story 1. The Keeper Who Never Left. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stay alone in a lighthouse, miles away from land, with nothing but the sound of waves and wind to keep you company? For most people, it's peaceful. For others, it becomes the place where they lose their sanity. This story comes from a man named Ethan Moore, a volunteer caretaker who spent one single weekend at a lighthouse off the coast of Maine and swears he encountered something that wasn't human, something that didn't want him there. Ethan had always been fascinated by abandoned places, so when he got the chance to spend 3 days maintaining an old lighthouse, he immediately agreed. The lighthouse was built in the late 1800s, previously manned by a keeper named Thomas Weller, who mysteriously vanished during a storm in 1932. His body was never found. Locals believed he drowned, but others whispered that he never truly left the lighthouse. They said his spirit still wandered the tower, repeating the same routine he had followed for decades. Ethan never believed ghost stories, but he liked the idea of solitude. He just didn't realize what solitude really meant on that island. The boat dropped Ethan off on a Friday evening. It was getting dark, and fog had begun to roll in, thick, heavy, and cold. The lighthouse looked like a tall, black silhouette against the gray sky. Its glass windows were cracked, and the metal railing near the top looked like it would break if he touched it. Inside, the air smelled like salt and damp wood. Floorboards creaked even when he wasn't moving, and the spiral staircase wound up into darkness that his flashlight barely pierced. Ethan set up his cot in the main room on the ground floor. There was no electricity, only an old lantern the volunteers kept there. As he lit it, the flame flickered violently, as if the room exhaled. He brushed it off. Around 1 a.m., Ethan was lying on his cot, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. That's when he heard footsteps on the stairs above him. Slow, heavy, measured. He sat up, instantly alert. The lighthouse was supposed to be empty. He called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence. Ethan grabbed the lantern, and the flame stretched tall for a moment, then dimmed. That's when he smelled it. A faint odor, like wet clothing that had been left to rot in seawater. He took a few cautious steps toward the staircase, shining the lantern upward, but the stairs were empty. Still, the air felt wrong, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching him. He checked the entire lighthouse from bottom to top. No animals, no intruders, nothing. When he came back down, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor, bare footprints, leading from the staircase straight toward his cot. Then they just stopped, as if the person who made them simply disappeared. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Ethan went outside to clear his head, but something about the island felt off. The air was strangely still. No birds, no insects, no sound except the waves. Around noon, Ethan climbed the tower to inspect the old lens. Reaching the top, he froze. Someone had cleaned the interior glass. It was spotless, polished in precise circular strokes, exactly the way lighthouse keepers used to clean it every morning. And on the dusty metal floor next to the lens, a handprint, large, deep, as if someone had pressed down with their full weight. Ethan didn't touch it. But the weirdest part was the smell, that same rotting seawater odor lingering in the air. He went back down quickly. That evening, as the sun set, he decided to sit outside for a bit. But as he walked around the lighthouse, he suddenly froze. There was a figure standing behind the glass of the upper lantern room. A silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, just standing there, staring out at the sea. Ethan ran back inside and rushed up the stairs. But by the time he reached the top, the room was empty. Except there was condensation on the inside of the glass. A foggy imprint in the shape of a face pressed against it, and as if someone had been standing there seconds earlier. Ethan stepped back, heart pounding. He wanted to leave, but the next boat wasn't coming until Sunday morning. He was stuck. That night was worse, much worse. Ethan tried to sleep, but sometime after midnight, he heard the sound again. Footsteps. But this time, they were coming down the stairs. He could hear the slow drag of a heel, the creak of each wooden step bending under weight. He grabbed the lantern, hands shaking violently. But when he looked toward the staircase, he almost screamed. A shadow stretched across the wall, tall, human-shaped, slowly descending the steps. Even though nothing was there, it reached the bottom and stopped. The lantern flame shrunk nearly to nothing. Ethan backed away until he hit the wall. Then he heard it, a breath, right next to his ear, long, wet, ragged. He swung the lantern wildly, but the room was empty. He didn't sleep again. On Sunday morning, Ethan packed his things early and sat outside on the rocks, waiting for the rescue boat. He refused to stay inside the lighthouse for even a minute longer. As he was waiting, he opened a metal box the volunteers had left in the supply shed. Inside were old documents, photos, and a journal wrapped in cloth. It belonged to Thomas Weller, the missing lighthouse keeper. The entries were normal at first: weather notes, maintenance logs, until the final week. The handwriting became shaky, frantic. One entry read, "He is here again. He climbs the stairs with me every night. I hear him breathing, but when I turn, he is never there." Another, "He watches me through the glass. I see his reflection standing behind mine, but when I turn, only the sea." And the last entry, dated the night before Thomas disappeared. "I cannot leave the light. If I leave, he will take my place, and I will never be allowed to go home." Ethan closed the journal as the boat approached. He didn't look back at the lighthouse, but the captain noticed how pale he looked and asked jokingly, "Rough weekend?" Ethan didn't laugh. He simply whispered, "He never left." When the captain asked who he meant, Ethan pointed toward the lantern room at the very top. There was a figure standing there, watching the boat leave. The captain saw it too, and his face turned white. The lighthouse had been empty for decades. Story 2. The signal that wasn't meant for us. There's a reason lighthouse keepers used to send signals out into the ocean. Some were meant for ships. Others were warnings. This next story comes from Jordan Blake, a marine electronics technician who was hired to inspect a malfunctioning signal transmitter inside a lighthouse off the coast of Alaska. What he discovered there wasn't a malfunction. It was a message, but not from the living. Jordan's job was simple. He had to check why an old lighthouse, one that had been decommissioned in the 90s, was sending out distress signals in the middle of the night. The problem: there was no power supply to that lighthouse anymore. No generators, no batteries, no solar panels. It should have been dead for decades. But for the last week, boats passing by had been picking up a repeating message on their radios. "Mayday, please respond. He won't let me leave," followed by static and a low humming noise. The Coast Guard wanted the transmitter shut down, so they hired Jordan to go check it out. He wasn't thrilled about it, especially since it required a 2-hour boat trip to an island covered in fog 24/7. But he needed the money. Jordan reached the island around 3 p.m. The place was bleak. Dead trees, jagged rocks, and a shoreline full of rotting driftwood. The lighthouse stood at the highest point, tall, old, and covered in rust. Its windows were shattered, its metal door half broken. Jordan dragged his toolbox up the hill. Even before he stepped inside, his radio crackled in his jacket pocket. "Mayday. Please respond. He won't let me leave." Jordan froze. The transmitter was definitely inside, but according to every record, the power lines leading to the lighthouse had been cut 30 years earlier. He climbed the steps slowly, pushing open the heavy door. The interior was cold, damp, and unbelievably dark. His flashlight barely penetrated the shadowy hall. Something about the silence didn't feel normal. It felt pressured, like the entire building was holding its breath. Jordan began checking the ground floor wiring, but everything was dead. No cables, no voltage. It was impossible for the signal to be coming from here. So he started climbing the spiral staircase. Halfway up, he heard something. A voice, whispering. At first it sounded like wind slipping through cracks, but the words were too clear. "Don't go up there." Jordan froze so hard he felt his muscles lock. He shined his flashlight up the stairs, nothing. Then he looked at the wall. His light passed over something that shouldn't have been there. Scratches. Hundreds of them. Deep gouges carved into the metal. He stepped closer and saw the same words repeated over and over in jagged letters. "Don't respond. Don't respond. Don't respond." Each line was carved with so much force that the metal had bent inward. Jordan swallowed hard and kept climbing. At the top of the lighthouse was the old signal and lens room. It shouldn't have had power. It shouldn't have been operating. But as Jordan reached it, he saw a faint glow coming from under the door. He slowly pushed it open. The room was lit by a flickering old transmitter box, decades old, covered in dust. Yet somehow, it was on. Its indicator lights blinked weakly, like a heartbeat. And through the static-filled speaker, Jordan heard it again. Mayday. Please respond. He won't let me leave. Jordan approached it slowly. Then the message changed. The static cut out. The humming grew louder. And a new voice spoke. Is someone there? Jordan stepped backward so fast he hit the glass wall behind him. If someone is there, please answer me. Jordan cleared his throat. Who is this? He said cautiously. There was silence for a moment. Then the voice whispered, Don't listen to him. Jordan stiffened. What? Who? The radio crackled violently. Then another voice came through, deeper, heavier, like someone speaking underwater. Don't interfere. Jordan's blood ran cold. The two voices continued. The first one, desperate, broken human. Please, help me. He won't let me leave. I've been trying to warn them for so long. And the second voice, cold and emotionless, stopped talking. Jordan didn't understand. He didn't want to. He reached toward the transmitter to unplug it. But the moment his fingers touched it, every light in the room flashed violently, then went out. The room fell into complete darkness. Jordan's flashlight flickered. Something was moving behind him. The scraping sound came first, metal against metal, not far away. Then slow footsteps. Jordan spun around, shining his flashlight toward the lens room's glass. Something was outside the lighthouse, standing on a narrow balcony walkway. Just a silhouette, tall, still, not moving. Its shape was wrong. Too thin, too long in the arms, bent slightly forward like it was listening. Then it tapped on the glass. One tap. Hard, deliberate. Jordan backed away, heart punching his chest. The figure tapped again, then slowly dragged its fingers down the glass, leaving a long, foggy smear. Jordan reached for the transmitter again, and it suddenly crackled to life. The desperate voice returned, louder this time. Run, run. He knows you are here. The message cut off. Silence. Then the second voice whispered through the radio. Don't leave. It's rude to ignore a signal. At that exact moment, the glass cracked. A thin fracture line spread across the window like lightning. The figure outside pressed its face against the glass. Though Jordan couldn't see its features, only a distorted outline. Whatever it wasn't human. The fracture grew deeper. Jordan bolted for the stairs. Running down a spiral staircase in near darkness is a nightmare. Jordan slipped twice, grabbing the railing to avoid falling to his death. But the worst part, he could hear footsteps rushing down the outside of the lighthouse. Heavy ones, following him, matching his pace. Whatever was outside was going to meet him at the bottom. Jordan leapt down the final steps and ran for the exit door, but before he could reach it, the radio signal came through again from his jacket pocket. He hadn't touched his radio since he arrived. Static. Then the desperate voice burst out. He's coming from the left. Go right. Go right. Jordan didn't think. He obeyed. He sprinted out the main door and veered right, barely managing to hide behind a large rock formation. Something emerged from the fog on the left. A tall, shadow-like figure moved past the lighthouse entrance, slow, deliberate, searching. It sniffed the air. Jordan held his breath. Every muscle in his body felt like stone. The figure paused, turned its head slightly, and then it walked back toward the lighthouse. Jordan waited a full minute, then ran for the boat. Once he got safely offshore, he finally contacted the Coast Guard. They told him something that made his stomach twist. There hasn't been a lighthouse keeper there for 28 years. The last one went missing. His name was David Marsh. Jordan froze. The desperate voice. That had to be him. Then came the part Jordan hates most. The Coast Guard added that David Marsh had used the exact same radio frequency when he disappeared. The radio crackled again before Jordan could reply. His handheld device, which he had turned off, switched itself on. Thank you for listening. Jordan dropped the radio. It fell onto the boat floor, speaker still hissing. He's angry now. He doesn't like when someone answers our call. Jordan stared at the island shrinking behind him. Fog rolled over the lighthouse again, and just before the signal cut to silent static, the second voice whispered one last time, Don't ignore the next transmission. Jordan never reported back to that island. And the distress signal, it still broadcasts on some nights, even though the transmitter has no power. Story 3. The man in the fog. Fog is normal around lighthouses, but the kind I'm about to describe wasn't fog at all. This last story comes from Evan Taylor, a photographer who traveled to the coast of Maine to capture long exposure shots of old lighthouses. What he captured instead was something looking back at him. Something that should not exist in any place living can go. Evan loved storm photography. He loved the unpredictability of nature, especially when fog, lightning, and waves collided into a dramatic scene. He had heard of an abandoned structure called Briar Point Lighthouse, known for its thick mist year-round. Most photographers avoided it, not Evan. He arrived just before sunset, but as soon as he got out of the car, he realized the fog wasn't normal. It was dense, heavy, cold, like walking into a freezer. His breath came out white even though it was late summer. Evan shrugged it off, thinking it was just coastal temperature drop. He grabbed his camera bag and began walking toward the lighthouse, a tall, narrow structure with blackened stone and a faint, metallic groan whenever the wind hit it. He felt watched almost immediately, but for a photographer, that wasn't unusual. Isolation can do that to your mind. He climbed onto the rocks, set up his tripod, and aimed his camera at the lighthouse. He took a test shot. The picture loaded on his screen, and his stomach twisted. In the photo, standing near the base of the lighthouse, was a man. Not close enough to be clear, but enough to see he was extremely tall, well over 6 feet, and unnaturally thin. He was facing the wall of the lighthouse, standing completely still. Evan lowered the camera and looked toward the lighthouse with his naked eyes. No one was there. He blinked, looked back at the photo. The man was still there. Evan felt a nervous laugh escape him. Maybe it was pareidolia, a trick of the fog and lighting. He took another picture. This time the man was closer, standing just a few feet from the door, still facing away. Evan slowly lowered his camera again. Nothing, just fog and stone. He swallowed hard. Then he made the worst decision he could have made. He walked toward the lighthouse to check. The metal door to the lighthouse was rusted, so rusted that there was no way anyone could open it without tools. But when Evan touched it, it swung open effortlessly, like someone had opened it moments before. The inside was pitch black, cold, and wet, as if someone had recently splashed water across the floor. Then Evan heard something from deep inside the tower. Footsteps, slow, measured, not echoing like a human's, but muffled like someone walking on soaked cloth. He stepped back immediately. "Hello? Someone there?" He called out. Only silence answered. But then, something else. A voice. Not quite human. Not quite a whisper. It came from the stairwell spiraling up the tower. "Come." Closer. Evan froze. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move, like the air itself had turned heavy and locked his legs in place. And then, a shape began descending the stairs. At first, Evan only saw a shadow. Then it stepped into the faint light coming through the open door, the tall, thin man from the photograph. But now Evan could see him clearly, and he wished he hadn't. His proportions were wrong. His limbs too long, his shoulders too narrow, his neck slightly tilted as if broken, and his face. It wasn't facing Evan. It was facing backward, a full 180 degrees, the back of the head toward Evan, the face pointing behind him. Evan staggered back, nearly slipping on wet stone. The thing didn't move at first. It just stood there, breathing. Its breath sounded thick, wet, like fluid sloshing in its lungs. Then its head began to turn, slowly, silently, turning, until the face pointed directly at Evan. But the eyes weren't eyes. They were hollow, empty sockets leaking thin streams of fog. Its mouth opened wide, far wider than any human jaw should, and a deep, rattling whisper escaped. "Did you see me?" Evan turned and ran. Fog should scatter when you move through it. But this fog pushed back. It tightened around him, slowed him down, almost as if it had weight. Evan stumbled across the rocks, reaching for his car in the distance. Behind him, he heard the thing descending the lighthouse steps at an impossible speed, each step slamming like metal striking stone. He didn't dare look back, but he did see something out of the corner of his eye. The fog behind him was moving, curling, forming a shape. A human shape, arms stretching out. Reaching for him, Evan sprinted harder. He reached his car, yanked the door open, and jumped inside. He locked the doors and turned the engine on. As he reversed, the fog swirled violently around the lighthouse. Then, the tall man stepped out of the fog, only a few feet in front of his car, standing completely still, its head tilted, watching him with eyeless sockets. Evan floored the gas. The car shot backward, tires skidding over gravel. He didn't stop until he reached the main road. He drove for miles before pulling over to breathe. But when he grabbed his camera to review the photos, that's when he realized the horror wasn't over. The first few images were normal. Fog, lighthouse, dark sky. Then he reached the last one he took, the one right before he ran. His hands went numb as he stared at the screen. In the image, the tall man wasn't near the lighthouse. He wasn't at the base. He wasn't on the rocks. He was right behind Evan, standing inches from him, too close to have gone unnoticed, one hand raised, just about to touch his shoulder. Evan dropped the camera on the passenger seat and hit the gas again, leaving the area entirely. Evan never returned to that lighthouse, but other photographers have tried. None stayed more than a few minutes. Most reported hearing someone behind them, even when alone. One said he felt a tap on his shoulder, turned around, and saw nothing but dense fog. Another captured a long exposure shot showing a tall, thin figure in the mist, even though he was completely alone. And just 2 months ago, the Coast Guard officially closed off the entire area, calling it a structural danger zone. But the locals know the truth. Fog doesn't move like that. Doors don't open on their own. And tall, backward-faced figures don't just appear in photographs, not unless they want to be seen. If you enjoyed these 3 disturbing lighthouse horror stories, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our channel Dark Vision for more terrifying true stories every week. You never know. The next time you see a lighthouse glowing through the fog, something else might be watching you.